You there, janitor? Want to spar? The sun hung low above Valencia Innovations, casting angular light through the glass-paneled atrium, the kind that turned floor tiles into golden mirrors. A Tuesday morning, too early for tension, too late for subtlety. The smell of espresso clung to the sleeves of every junior exec in sight. Half of them stood gathered around the edge of a grappling mat recently installed for Executive Wellness Week. The other half stood frozen, watching what no one expected. Cassandra Rourke, polished, precise, and always 5 degrees colder than the room, stepped onto the mat barefoot. Her navy slacks were neatly rolled up above her ankles, her crisp white blouse unbuttoned at the collar. Her voice cut across the atrium like a clean blade. "You there, janitor? Want to spar?" Heads turned sharply. Micah Lane didn't. He was kneeling by the far edge of the marble floor, just beyond the mat, mop still in hand. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-30s perhaps, dressed in gray workwear, sleeves pushed to his elbows. His boots were worn. His eyes were not. The mop bucket gave a soft slosh as he rose slowly, eyes lifting not with fear nor arrogance, but with something else. A stillness. He looked at her like someone might look at a sudden gust of wind, not with challenge, but awareness. He stepped forward. Laughter flickered at the edges of the crowd. Some whispered, others smirked. Cassandra remained still. She had done a year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in college. Jason, her best friend back then, had introduced her to it. She remembered how he used to say, "If you want to lead, learn how to fall first." But she hadn't fallen since. Today, she intended to lead. Publicly. Boldly. "Just a light roll," she added, tying back her hair into a tight knot. "To show the team that hierarchy doesn't mean fear." Micah nodded. No fear. They bowed. The mat fell quiet. Even the espresso machine stopped hissing. Cassandra lunged first, sharp, assertive, textbook. She shot for a collar tie, hoping to catch him with a snap down and flow into a front headlock. It was something she'd practiced countless times. It usually worked. Micah didn't resist. Instead, with the gentlest pivot of his hips and a soft sweep of his leg, he redirected her momentum. Cassandra felt the mat hit her back before she understood how she'd left her feet. She blinked. He was already standing, offering her a hand. No grin. No gloating, just an open palm. The atrium gasped. Cassandra took the hand and stood, trying to shake off the heat rising to her cheeks. Her breath came short, but she masked it with a tight smile. "Again?" she asked, brushing her palms against her thighs. Micah bowed again. The second time she tried to use her strength, driving her shoulder in, aiming to muscle him into the ground. He didn't fight it. He yielded, turned, and let her fall into empty space. He caught her before she hit the mat too hard. And again, the hand. Calm, steady, like nothing in the world needed proving. By the third round, Cassandra knew. He wasn't just holding back. He was redirecting, listening. She stood, dusted herself off, and bowed once more. "That's enough," she said, her voice thinner than usual. Applause began cautiously, then grew, more confused than celebratory. People weren't sure who'd won. Some whispered that she let him take her down. Others muttered about the janitor's form, his control, his grace. Micah stepped back silently, picked up his mop again, and continued cleaning the spot just outside the mat, as if nothing had happened. Cassandra didn't speak. She didn't make eye contact. She walked straight to the elevator, palms damp, her pulse high in her throat. The doors closed behind her with a soft chime, leaving the atrium buzzing like a hive just rattled by a sudden wind. In the executive suite above, Cassandra Rourke stood before the window, arms folded, watching her own reflection more than the city. Who was he? She'd seen that kind of movement before, not in local dojos or startup founders trying martial arts to build resilience. No, that level of awareness, of restraint, it came from somewhere else. Something deeper, more personal. Military, maybe. Or worse, loss. Her assistant, Haley, knocked once before entering. "Great turnout this morning," she said lightly. "Though the janitor kind of stole the show." Cassandra turned, her face unreadable. "What's his name?" Haley blinked. I can check the facilities roster. I think it's Micah Lane?" Cassandra didn't answer. She turned back to the glass. Her reflection stared back, composed, confident, polished. But she could still feel the moment her balance left her, the softness with which she hit the mat, the certainty with which he let her go. Like he knew exactly how far someone could fall and still rise. Downstairs, Micah Lane emptied the mop bucket, rinsed his hands in the janitor's sink, and exhaled. He felt the stares still burning on his back, felt the whispering weight of curiosity. He wasn't afraid of it, but he didn't welcome it either. He finished the shift as he always did, polishing the glass entryway, locking up the lower east stairwell, and finally stepping into the early afternoon air. The sun was warm. The breeze carried the sound of the city, horns, footsteps, life. His daughter Ruby would be home from school soon. Micah checked his watch. Time to walk. Time to return to the quiet rhythm of their tiny apartment. The rice cooker ticking, the homework on the kitchen table, the laughter that still somehow found them. He didn't mind the questions waiting behind him at Valencia. Let them wonder. He had nothing to prove, not anymore. But in the security room, Cassandra had already requested the footage. She didn't tell Haley, didn't inform HR. She just typed the date and timestamp into the system and pressed play. There it was. The slow bow, the calm stance. The way Micah flowed like water around each of her moves, never striking, never forcing. She watched it again, and again. By the sixth time, her coffee had gone cold, her jaw clenched in ways she didn't recognize, not because she was angry, but because something had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt it. The faintest crack in the armor she'd worn since college. The armor built from ambition, detachment, drive. The armor Jason used to tease her about. Jason. Her hand paused on the mouse. She hadn't thought of him in years. And now, the janitor, the mop, the mat, and the look in his eyes when he offered her his hand. Not pity. Not pride, just presence. He cleaned quietly, always before sunrise, always with boots that remembered too much. The floors never spoke back. That was part of the reason he liked them. Every morning, before the city fully woke, Micah Lane moved through the halls of Valencia Innovations like a shadow that had learned rhythm. His boots made soft, honest sounds on the marble. Not squeaky like new soles, but weathered, weighted. Boots that had walked through places no one in this building could pronounce. Boots that had stood still while the world exploded behind wire fences and through desert winds. Boots that had carried him home. When they let him come home, he didn't walk with regret. He walked with memory. There was a difference. By 5:15 a.m., the executive lounge was already polished. He'd moved from West Wing to Atrium, silent and unbothered. Every movement was deliberate, not sluggish, not rushed. There was a kind of grace in how he poured the cleaning solution, a kind of care in how he held the mop. Some would call it menial work. Micah never did. After all he'd seen, this place, this job, was peace. And peace, to him, had always been something you made, not something you found. At precisely 6:45 a.m., Micah clocked out. Same as every day. He walked to the train, rode 3 stops east, and arrived outside Jefferson Elementary just in time to see a small pair of sneakers hopping down the final stair of the school bus. "Dad!" Ruby grinned, brown curls bouncing. "Hey, kiddo!" He smiled, crouching to catch her in one arm, the other hand gently fixing her too loose backpack strap. She launched into a tale about a class hermit crab named Sheldon, a boy named Malik who sneezed milk out of his nose, and a spelling quiz that wasn't hard but also wasn't easy, you know? Micah nodded. He always nodded. Ruby didn't need answers. She needed space to be. Back at their apartment, she worked through homework at the kitchen table while he made eggs and toast. Their home was small, with mismatched chairs and a hand-me-down TV, but it was steady, safe. There were photos on the fridge. Ruby in a cardboard astronaut helmet, Micah asleep on the couch with a bedtime book open across his chest, the two of them building a fort out of blankets and regretless laughter. No war medals on the wall, no mention of his past. Only one photo sat framed beside his bed, a unit shot from 10 years ago. 7 men, 1 woman, 1 Micah, clean-shaven and stone-eyed. And one man in particular, grinning, arms folded, always first to crack a joke. Jason Carter. Back at Valencia, the name was just beginning to rise like dust behind closed doors. Cassandra Rourke leaned back in her ergonomic chair, staring at the grainy news clipping that intern Jules Moreno had sent her. Unsolicited, of course. Micah Lane, former Marine instructor, dishonorably discharged after a live training accident that left 1 soldier paralyzed. The soldier's name? Jason Carter. Her screen blurred. The coffee in her cup had gone cold, untouched. She hadn't realized her hands were trembling until she set it down. Jason. She hadn't spoken that name out loud in 8 years. He'd been her best friend in college, the one person who treated her like more than a resume on legs. He introduced her to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. "It'll teach you what the boardroom never will," he used to say. "How to lose and still stand up." He sparred with her every Thursday, and every Thursday she lost. Not because he was better, but because he never fought to win. He fought to connect. Then came the war, and the silence. She didn't call him back when the news came. She couldn't. It was easier to pretend she hadn't known how to help. That ambition had made her too busy, that there was nothing left to say. But the truth was simpler. She was afraid. Afraid to face what she couldn't fix. Afraid of what she might see in his eyes. And now, Micah. The janitor who swept her off her feet, literally, in front of 50 employees, the man who didn't smirk, didn't speak, just stood there like still water. Jason's instructor. The same man. It wasn't coincidence. Not to Cassandra. She paced. Was this deliberate? Did he know who she was? Was this some twisted reckoning? A quiet revenge? The word echoed like a blade unsheathed in her mind. Exposure. She needed to reclaim authority. Now. An hour later, her assistant Haley stood outside her office door, tablet in hand. "You're asking for a full-staff wellness event?" "Yes," Cassandra said, voice clipped. "With you and Micah sparring again?" "Correct." "But won't that—" "It'll boost morale. We'll have cameras this time. It's a good look. Humility, transparency, authenticity." Haley hesitated. "He might not—" "He will." Cassandra turned back to her window. Her reflection looked back, composed, calculated, colder than she remembered being at 20. She used to believe in sweat and breath and the thud of a clean takedown. She used to believe in trust on the mat, in grace, in friendship. Now? Now she believed in framing the narrative. And if she had to rewrite the memory of that match, the one where the janitor made her look small, so be it. Because weakness was unacceptable, and the past had to stay buried. Downstairs, Micah sensed something shifting. He always did. That evening, as he sat with Ruby watching an old animated film, her head on his shoulder, her small hand holding his, he found his eyes drifting, not to the screen, but inward. He remembered Jason's voice, remembered the way he'd laugh during drills, saying, "You teach with fear, you make soldiers. You teach with care, you make men." Micah hadn't taught with fear, but he had been careless, just once, and that once had cost a man the use of his legs. That man had forgiven him, but Micah had not fully. So he mopped floors, woke early, lived quietly, raised Ruby, and tried, every day, to let his presence become his apology. He didn't know Cassandra was preparing to make him a lesson again. He didn't know her wounds were older than her pride. But he felt it, like a shift in pressure before a storm. And still, he didn't resist. He breathed, and he waited. Jules Moreno wasn't supposed to be reading personnel files, but the janitor's name wouldn't leave her alone. It started with a gut feeling. Jules Moreno, the 23-year-old intern with a caffeine habit and a nose for other people's business, hadn't meant to dig. Not really. She just couldn't stop thinking about that sparring match. The janitor, the CEO, that moment when everything froze, and somehow he moved like time itself bowed to him. Micah Lane. She'd typed the name out of curiosity, out of confusion, and maybe because everyone else had forgotten to ask who he was. But Jules didn't forget. She saw things, not the way Cassandra Rourke did, through numbers and sharp angles and quarterly projections, but through moments. Human ones. The way people flinched, the way they smiled only with their mouths, the way silence sometimes said more than applause. And Micah's silence that day? It wasn't passive. It was chosen. The first article she found was buried behind 6 pages of search results. Decorated Marine instructor discharged after training tragedy. She read it twice. Micah Lane, 10 years ago. Bronze Star recipient, promoted young, known for teaching restraint and control. Then a live training accident during a close-quarters simulation. 1 soldier paralyzed. Lane discharged. No criminal charges. Military closed the case. The paralyzed soldier's name? Jason Carter. Jules's breath caught. Even she knew that name. Everyone at Valencia had heard snippets of Cassandra's mysterious college years, the friend who introduced her to martial arts, then vanished from her life. Jason Carter. Rumor was, he was the only person who ever saw Cassandra cry once. Now Jules sat at her desk, hands frozen on the keyboard. Micah wasn't just a janitor. He was that Micah. By the time she closed the browser tab, her heart was racing. She could have stopped there. Should have. But instead, she opened the internal media request portal and submitted a seemingly innocuous request. Copy of Atrium security footage, BJJ sparring demo, previous Tuesday, for internal archive. She clicked send, then waited. 5 minutes later, the footage appeared in her inbox. She put in headphones, hit play. and watched. Not once, not twice, 7 times. The first time she saw what everyone else saw. Cassandra moving fast, aggressive, in control. Micah yielding, flowing, soft as mist. But the third time she started to notice what wasn't happening. He never struck, never forced. His grip was always light, his posture always low. By the 6th time, she was sure. He was holding back. Carefully, completely. And then, something else. A glance. Just before the second takedown, Micah looked at Cassandra's stance, then at her eyes, not to intimidate, but to check, to assess if she was still okay, to give her space to choose. Who was this man? And why was no one talking about it? Upstairs, Cassandra wasn't watching footage. She was preparing for her next move. The wellness seminar had been scheduled. The internal comms team was drafting a cheerful email. CEO Cassandra Rourke to Spar in Wellness Week kickoff, a lesson in balance and grit. The tone was curated, friendly, sharp, controlled. Cassandra sat in her office, staring at the mock-up of the email on her screen, her own smiling face, a quote beneath it. True leaders aren't afraid to sweat. It was fiction. But fiction, in the right hands, was power. The plan was simple. Recreate the match, but this time with angles, with editing, with a crowd prepped to applaud at the right moment. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about narrative. Micah Lane had embarrassed her, not by winning, but by not playing her game. This time, she would hold the frame. Micah didn't resist when the seminar was announced. He never did. Haley, the assistant, delivered the invitation to him like it was a peace offering. Just a friendly event, she said awkwardly. Cassandra's idea. You're kind of popular now. Micah nodded once, taking the paper. No questions, no objections. But inside, something old stirred. A ripple. Not fear, just memory. Of spotlights, of orders, of how easily the truth bent under the weight of reputation. The morning of the event arrived. Cassandra stepped onto the mat wearing a custom-fitted gi in navy and silver, embroidered with the Valencia emblem. A camera crew hovered nearby. The atrium buzzed with staged excitement. Lines had been rehearsed, reactions planned. Micah wore no GI, just his janitor uniform. Same faded gray shirt, same boots. They bowed. The spar lasted 3 minutes. Cassandra moved with calculated force. Micah responded, gently redirecting. But this time, when he could have swept her again, he didn't. He paused. Let her recover. Let her think she'd gained position. She smiled at the audience. It was the opening she needed. She tripped him with a tight inside hook. He landed on one shoulder, lightly, deliberately. She hovered above, panting, triumphant. The cameras clicked. The audience cheered. In the edit room, hours later, the marketing team trimmed the footage. They clipped out the stillness, cut the pauses, replayed her final takedown in slow motion. The video was uploaded to the company's LinkedIn and internal newsletter. It was titled, CEO Demonstrates Grace and Grit in Corporate Wellness Rollout. Jules watched the video and saw a lie. She watched it in silence, hands clenched. This wasn't about image. This was about erasure, about reducing something beautiful to ego and optics. Micah had held back, and they turned his restraint into her victory. That night, Jules opened her browser again, logged into an anonymous file host, uploaded the unedited footage, attached no commentary, just the raw truth. Then she linked it, anonymously, to a quiet Reddit thread titled, "Watch How This Janitor Moves, Then Watch Who He Let Win." The next morning, it hit LinkedIn. By noon, it was everywhere. The post read, "You can teach people how to fight, but you can't teach what this man did. He chose not to win. He chose dignity. That's real power." The comments flooded in. "He moved like a black belt, but never struck once. This is the most leadership I've seen in a decade." And it came from the janitor. Humility, precision, stillness. Whoever he is, I want to learn from him. Micah Lane. Remember the name? By that evening, Micah Lane was trending, not just in martial arts forums, but in corporate leadership circles. And Cassandra? She sat alone in her office, blinds closed, watching the unedited footage now making the rounds, the part where she charged. The part where he caught her gently. The part where he chose stillness instead of spotlight. The part where he offered his hand. Again. Not as a victor, but as a mirror. And for the first time in her entire career, Cassandra Rourke didn't know what to say. She had power. She had position. But she'd never had that kind of presence. And somewhere in the silence that followed, something cracked. Not loudly, not all at once, but deeply. The applause wasn't for her. It was for the version of her they had edited. The atrium smelled like lavender floor wax and bright ambition. Cassandra Rourke stood in front of 200 employees, smiling. Her posture was flawless, chin slightly raised, shoulders square, not a wrinkle in her designer blouse. She'd practiced the speech. Not the words, those she could improvise, but the cadence, the tone. How to seem approachable without being soft. How to sell vulnerability without showing weakness. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the freeze frame. Cassandra, mid-takedown, arm cocked, Micah's frame lowered beneath hers. Triumphant. Elegant. A perfect capture. The audience clapped. They always clapped. She let the applause linger, then raised her hand gently, the way a conductor ends a symphony. "Thank you," she said, "but today's not about me." That was a lie. Today's about resilience, about balance, and yes, about learning from unexpected places. Sometimes that means humbling yourself, even if just a little. The crowd chuckled, a few nods. Several interns scribbled quotes, eager to include them in performance reviews. "Leadership," Cassandra continued, "isn't about domination, it's about presence." That part was true. At least it sounded true. She paused. The final slide came on behind her. A black and white shot of her and Micah bowing. Equal. Formal. Almost reverent. But edited. Carefully. The awkward slip was cut. The moment of hesitation, where her eyes flickered with doubt, gone. The gentleness in Micah's hands when he caught her fall, cropped. The story was clean now, and the applause rose again. Jules Moreno sat in the back row, arms crossed, jaw clenched. She knew the truth. So did half the room. Because the unedited footage she leaked had now passed 3 million views. LinkedIn, Reddit, even Instagram reels were slicing Micah's movements frame by frame, comparing them to black belts, to Buddhist monks, to old masters of movement and breath. And yet, here Cassandra stood, polished and applauded, wearing the moment like a medal she hadn't earned. Jules leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "You ever see a judo throw that soft?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Cassandra returned to her office, high above the empty streets. The city was blurred behind glass. Reflections moved more than traffic. In her inbox were congratulations. endorsements. Even an email from a Forbes columnist requesting an interview. We'd love to feature you in our Leadership in Stillness series. Your ability to integrate humility into a high-power role is inspiring. She read the line twice, then clicked Mark as unread. Her office was quiet. She liked it that way. But tonight, the silence pressed on her differently, like a question waiting to be asked. She reached for the remote and clicked open the company footage again. The clean version. The curated lie. She watched herself smile after the final takedown, watched herself bow, watched herself accept the moment like it belonged to her. She closed her eyes, and then, for the first time, opened a different file. The unedited one. Micah's movement was slower in this version. You could see the way he scanned her balance, how he invited her into overcommitting, how he absorbed momentum rather than deflected it, how he never reached for control, only guided her toward gravity. And the moment she fell, he caught her elbow before it hit. Not to restrain, to protect. It wasn't martial arts, it was mercy. She remembered Jason's words years ago, sprawled on a college mat after she'd tried, and failed, to pin him. Anyone can win, but not everyone knows when not to. Back then, she'd rolled her eyes, called him soft. Now? Now she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Micah found something under the janitor closet door, a folded printout. No sender, no signature. It was a transcript, not of the seminar, but of the online comments under the viral footage. Lines highlighted, "He chose stillness over spectacle. You can't fake presence like that. I've trained 10 years and never seen that kind of control. Forget titles. This is what mastery looks like." Micah read each one slowly. He didn't smile. He just sat, holding the paper in two hands like it was something sacred. Then, he folded it back up, placed it gently into his jacket pocket, and began sweeping the east hallway. By Monday, the edited narrative had fractured. Too many employees had seen the real footage. Some politely praised Cassandra's composure, but with eyes that asked more than they said. Some interns, like Jules, stopped pretending. Even the company's Slack channel shifted. Jokes, memes, praise for Sensei Micah. And something deeper. Micah had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of something older. Something quiet. Like truth that didn't need a spotlight. He never posted a single comment, never responded, never changed his routine. He kept mopping. And somehow, that made it louder. That afternoon, Cassandra's assistant Haley entered her office holding an envelope. "This was slipped under the glass door in the west hallway," she said, a strange look in her eyes. Cassandra took it, eyes narrowing. There was no name, just a child's handwriting on the front. To Miss Cassandra, from Ruby Lane. Inside, a note on wide-ruled paper. "Hi, Miss Cassandra. Thank you for sparring with my dad." He came home smiling. He doesn't smile like that very much. I think he likes you even if he's quiet. He taught me how to fall without getting scared. I used to cry when I fell. He says you were strong. I think strong people help others feel safe. Anyway, thank you for making my dad happy. Love, Ruby. Age 7. Cassandra read it once. Then again, she didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her folded. Something that had been ironed flat for years. She turned her chair toward the window and let the letter sit on her lap, like a weight she wasn't sure how to carry. No awards on her wall had ever said thank you like this. No profile in Forbes had ever made her feel so small. And somehow, so human. He note wasn't typed. It was written in blue crayon, with uneven lines and a heart drawn in the corner. It destroyed her. It sat on her desk for 3 days. Folded, unmoved. Every time Cassandra Rourke reached for her mouse, the corner of the envelope brushed against her wrist, like a whisper she wasn't ready to hear again. She told herself she was too busy, that a CEO didn't have time for children's scribbles, that it had been sweet, sure, but irrelevant. But she hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't even put it in a drawer. Because in the quiet, long after the email stopped coming and the glass skyscraper hushed itself to sleep, Cassandra wasn't thinking about strategy or market cap or even the backlash from the unedited video. She was thinking about a girl she'd never met, a girl who called her strong, a girl who said he smiled. She hadn't seen it, not during the match, not even afterward. But now it haunted her. Not because it hurt her ego, but because it exposed the vacancy inside her. The applause had faded, the spotlight had moved. But Ruby's letter remained, a handwritten thing, unpolished and unfiltered, a child's truth with no agenda. And that truth? It hurt. Cassandra Rourke didn't cry often. She had trained herself to move past tears, to compartmentalize grief, to turn personal pain into polished performance. Her father had taught her that, not with words, with silence. She'd once fallen down the stairs at 11, cracked her chin on the last step. Blood pooled in her mouth. Her father had glanced up from the newspaper and said simply, "Get up. Pain is part of being strong." So she'd stopped crying, stopped bleeding where people could see it. And when Jason got hurt and stopped returning her calls, she didn't cry then either. But now, sitting alone in the darkened office, with Ruby's note in her hands, she did. Not loud, not broken, just quietly, just enough. Tears slipped down her cheeks and caught on her blazer collar. And in that small collapse, something gave. The next morning, Cassandra arrived early. Not to work, but to wait. She stood outside the west hallway where she knew Micah's route would pass at 6 o'clock a.m. sharp. He came, as always, silent and steady. His cart moved with the grace of habit. His boots whispered against the marble like they belonged there more than anyone's heels. He saw her, didn't stop, but didn't flinch either. She waited until he reached her, then spoke. "I got your daughter's letter." Micah didn't respond. He simply looked at her. Not cold, not soft, just there. Cassandra cleared her throat. "She said you smiled." A pause, then a faint nod. "She said you taught her how to fall." Another nod. "I don't know how to fall," she admitted. This time something flickered in his eyes. Not pity, not judgment, just a kind of listening that made her feel human. They stood there in the hallway. No crowd, no cameras, no curated narrative, just a mop bucket, and the woman who once needed to win everything. "I used to train," she said, voice quiet. "With Jason." Micah's hands stopped moving. Her eyes dropped. "He never told me about you. Not really. Just that he had a mentor, someone who taught him to listen when he fought." Micah finally spoke. "I taught him how not to fight." His voice was soft, rough around the edges, like it came from a place that had to be rebuilt. "I didn't listen that day," he added. Cassandra's throat tightened. "You tried to protect him," she said, unsure whether it was comfort or confession. "I failed." "No," she whispered. "I did. I walked away." He didn't look surprised, only still. "I couldn't handle him being hurt," she admitted. So I turned it into ambition. I made silence a weapon. Micah leaned the mop against the wall. Sometimes silence is survival, he said. They stood in it, that silence. And for once, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like air. Later that day, Jules found Cassandra sitting on the floor of the wellness studio. Alone. No shoes, no laptop. No plan, just quiet. Jules hovered in the doorway, unsure. Cassandra didn't look up, but after a moment she said, "You were the one who leaked the footage." It wasn't a question. Jules froze. "I should fire you," Cassandra added. Then, calmly, she turned and looked at her. "But I won't." Jules blinked. "Why?" "Because you told the truth I was afraid of." Jules took a step closer. "Micah didn't ask me to." "I know." Another pause, the kind that invited honesty. "I thought it would hurt the company," Jules said, "but instead people started talking about what matters." They did. Cassandra looked toward the mirrored wall, where her own reflection sat barefoot and undone. "I've spent years trying to win, but Ruby wrote me one sentence that none of you ever have." Jules furrowed her brow. "She said thank you for making her father smile." The words broke like sunlight through frost. Cassandra exhaled, long, shaky. Then she smiled. Not for performance, just because she could. That night, Micah returned home and found Ruby asleep on the couch, a half-colored drawing still clutched in her hand. He pulled the blanket over her and gently peeled the paper from her fingers. It was him and Cassandra, standing beside each other. Above them, Ruby had written in wobbly blue marker, "Strong people help others feel strong, too." Micah sat at the edge of the couch for a long time, just holding it, just breathing. Back at Valencia, Cassandra stood in her office, staring out into the night. She reached into her drawer and pulled out something she hadn't touched in 2 decades, an old black-and-white photo. Her, Jason, and a handwritten note on the back. Jason's messy scrawl, "You don't have to win today." She finally understood. The point of the mat wasn't domination. It was permission to fall, to rise, to connect. She placed Ruby's note next to Jason's. 2 truths from 2 lives. Bridged by a man who never asked for credit, only presence. She didn't bring an apology. She brought silence, and for the first time, it was enough. The rooftop was quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the kind that settles after long noise, when the world finally exhales and listens. Cassandra Rourke stood by the concrete ledge, arms resting on the steel railing, watching the early morning light crack over the glass skyline. She hadn't slept much. The city below was beginning to stir, coffee carts rolling into corners, footsteps echoing on stone, a siren somewhere far off. But up here, it was still. She heard the door open behind her. Didn't turn. She didn't have to. Micah Lane's presence didn't need footsteps to be known. It arrived like gravity. A quiet force that asked for nothing but acknowledgement. He came to stand beside her, leaving just enough space. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. For once, the silence didn't choke her. It felt earned. When she did speak, her voice was lower than usual. "I didn't ask you to come, but I hoped you would." Micah nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I figured." Another pause. She let the wind fill it. "I used to come up here when I first took the job," she said. "It was the only place I could breathe without someone asking me for something." Micah glanced sideways. "You still come?" "No. I forgot it existed." He said nothing. I forgot a lot of things, she added. This time he waited. I forgot that leading isn't the same as winning, she said, and that not everything needs to be controlled to be respected. Her voice caught for just a second. She steadied it. I forgot, Jason. Micah's jaw tightened, but only slightly. He never forgot you. Cassandra's eyes closed. I should have visited him, she said. I told myself he wouldn't want pity, that I was too busy, that I'd just make it worse. Micah turned to face her. Sometimes being there is enough. Cassandra looked down at her hands. I didn't know how to be there. I only knew how to lead. And leading meant not cracking, not folding. She paused. And then you caught me. Micah didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. I didn't catch you, he said gently. You chose to fall. She let out a small laugh, dry and honest, and that might be the first real thing anyone said to me in years. He nodded. Truth tends to arrive when no one's performing. The breeze picked up. She leaned into it. I watched the footage, she admitted. The real one. More times than I'll ever admit. At first, I wanted to hate you for it. I thought you were trying to humiliate me. Micah looked down at his boots. I wasn't. I know, she said quickly. Now I know. But back then, all I saw was that someone let me fall and didn't stop it. And then I realized you could have ended it any moment. But you didn't. I didn't need to. Cassandra turned toward him fully now. Why? Why didn't you take control? Why not prove something? Micah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because fighting isn't always the point. She tilted her head, unsure. When you've seen real war, he continued, voice slow and heavy, you learn that control is an illusion. That real strength isn't about overpowering someone. It's about knowing when not to. Cassandra swallowed. That sounds like forgiveness. Micah looked out over the city. Sometimes it is. She stepped away from the railing, folding her arms, not out of cold, but out of habit. Do you believe in forgiveness? She asked. I've had to. But have you ever given it? Micah didn't answer immediately. Then, Jason forgave me before I could ask. She blinked. He told me, after the accident. Said it wasn't my fault, that he made the decision to push harder than he should have. But I was his instructor. I should have stopped him. I should have seen it coming. His voice was flat, not bitter, just weathered. I tried to stay in touch, he added. He stopped answering, but not out of anger. I think he just wanted to protect me from seeing him like that. She nodded slowly. He did that to me, too. Micah looked over. That's why you got harder. I didn't know how else to keep going. You became the only thing you thought people respected. Cassandra stared at him, and for the first time, didn't feel offended. She felt seen and safe. They sat together on the concrete ledge. No titles, no sparring, no power dynamics, just two people who had carried too much for too long. Micah reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not crumpled, carefully kept. Ruby's note. He handed it to her. I wanted to return this, he said. Cassandra took it, tracing the soft blue crayon lines, the childlike heart in the corner. She made you smile, she said. She makes me real. Cassandra stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it again and tucked it into her jacket. Not to return, but to keep. Micah stood. The sun was higher now. The city had fully woken. The rooftop no longer felt like a secret. Before he turned to leave, he paused. "You don't have to keep fighting to be strong," he said. Cassandra looked up at him. "Then what do I do instead?" He shrugged gently. "Learn how to stand, even when you're not on top." She nodded, then asked the one question she never thought she'd ask. "Would you teach me?" Micah smiled, a small one, but real. "I don't teach fighting anymore," he said. "I know. I teach presence." She followed him down the stairs, this time not to lead, not to frame, but to listen. There were no belts, no bows, no mats, just chairs, and the janitor standing barefoot at the front of the room. The email was short, no header image, no buzzwords. Subject: Optional Wellness Workshop, led by Micah Lane. Location: Conference Room C, 4th floor. Time: 9:00 a.m. Title: Mindful Combat, Awareness, Breath, and Balance. Note: no experience necessary, no uniforms. Come as you are. That was it. No sign-up sheet, no mandatory attendance, no executive announcement from Cassandra Rourke. Just a quiet invitation. And yet, at 8:58 a.m., the room was full. Not packed, but full in a way that felt intentional. Engineers, designers, a few product managers, an accountant with a nervous smile, even a couple of interns, Jules included, slouched at the back, curious and half-defensive. And in the front row, Ruby Lane. Feet swinging off the edge of the chair, ponytail slightly crooked, eyes wide with joy. Her presence made the space softer, braver. Micah stood barefoot in front of them. No mop, no mat, just him. And the silence. He didn't speak for the first full minute, not to create drama, but to allow stillness. Most people shifted, coughed, checked their phones, then caught themselves. Then he said, "You don't need to know how to fight." Pause. You need to know how to feel what's about to hit you and decide who you want to be when it does. A murmur passed through the room. "This isn't about jiu-jitsu," he said. "It's about how we hold ourselves. Not just on mats, but in meetings, in arguments, in life." He looked directly at a junior manager in the front row who straightened his spine instinctively. "I'm not going to teach you how to win," Micah said. "I'm going to teach you how to breathe before you choose to strike, and maybe how not to strike at all." Someone chuckled. Micah didn't. "This is not a joke, this is leadership." Over the next hour, he didn't demonstrate takedowns. He demonstrated posture. How people collapse into themselves during conflict. How breath rises too high when fear takes over. How standing still, truly still, can sometimes be louder than shouting. He asked volunteers to walk across the room, then asked them to do it without rushing through discomfort. People laughed at first, awkwardly. Then, slowly, they understood. The room calmed. He showed them how to breathe from their diaphragm, how to plant their feet wider when they feel emotionally cornered. He showed them what it meant to yield, not to submit, but to redirect. When someone attacks your idea, he said, don't tighten, don't flinch. Let it come through you. Catch it, understand it, then decide if it needs a response. No one took notes. They didn't need to. They felt it. Even the skeptics in the back stopped crossing their arms. Ruby raised her hand halfway through. Micah smiled. Yes, kiddo? Ruby stood up. Can I show them the standing tree thing? He nodded. She stepped into the center, placed her feet wide, lifted her arms like branches, and closed her eyes. "This is what Daddy taught me when I was scared to speak in class." Everyone watched as the tiny girl stood silently, her body swaying slightly, her breathing deep and slow. "Sometimes," she said with her eyes still closed, "being still is the bravest thing you can do." No one laughed. Not one person. In the back, Cassandra watched through the glass. She hadn't entered. Not yet. But she stood quietly, arms crossed, not as a barrier, but as a way to hold herself together. She saw engineers she hadn't spoken to in weeks leaning forward with attention. She saw interns uncrossing their arms, relaxing their jaws. She saw Micah, not performing, not preaching, being. He didn't lead the room with dominance. He held it with presence. And for the first time in years, Cassandra didn't feel jealous of someone's authority. She felt grateful for it. After the workshop ended, no one rushed out. People lingered. Not for selfies, not for networking, just to stand in the stillness a little longer. A few thanked Micah quietly. One executive asked if he'd ever considered coaching full-time. Micah shook his head gently. "I'm not here to teach you how to climb ladders," he said. "I'm here to remind you that you already know how to stand." Later that afternoon, Jules found Cassandra in the executive kitchen. She was pouring 2 cups of tea. "Chamomile," she said, sliding one across the counter to Jules. "You need it more than I do." Jules blinked, stunned. "Is this an apology?" Cassandra smirked faintly. "It's a start." They stood in the quiet. "He was amazing," Jules finally said. "Micah. It wasn't even about martial arts. It was human." Cassandra nodded. "That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because I built my entire career on performance, and he's changing this company just by being real." Jules sipped the tea. "So learn from him." Cassandra looked out the window. "I plan to." That night, in a small apartment lit by warm lamps and the sound of laughter from a tiny kitchen, Micah packed away Ruby's school bag. She tugged at his sleeve. "Did you see me today?" "I saw you." "Did I help?" He crouched down, holding her face gently. "You didn't just help," he said. "You reminded grown-ups how to be." She smiled, leaned into him, and whispered, "I think Miss Cassandra likes you." He chuckled. "I think she's learning to like herself." In her high-rise, Cassandra opened an old notebook, the kind she used in college. Inside, stuck between 2 pages, was a photo she hadn't seen in over a decade. Her, Jason, and a blurry shot of the old BJJ mat they used to train on. He had written something in faded ink on the back. "Don't train to win. Train to understand." She closed the notebook slowly, then opened her laptop. She created a new event listing. Internal Workshop Series, Learning to Stand. Instructor, Micah Lane. Advised by Cassandra Rourke. And at the bottom, attendance not required. Listening is. She sat back in her chair. Exhaled. And for the first time in her career, she didn't feel the need to win. She felt the need to grow. The cardboard box hadn't been opened in 20 years. It still smelled like old sweat, dried pine wood, and who she used to be. Cassandra Rourke had passed the hallway closet in her apartment 1,000 times. It sat there, narrow, silent, unnoticed. The kind of door you ignore when life feels forward-facing. But tonight, she stopped. There was no dramatic music. No thunderstorm outside, just the quiet hum of the city, the occasional honk 6 stories below, and her bare feet pressing into cool tile. She stared at the knob for a long moment. Then, with a breath steadier than she expected, she turned it. Inside, wedged behind a stack of old documents and a box of forgotten promotional awards, was a smaller, worn box, taped twice, labeled in faded Sharpie, J. Carter, 2005. And below that, written smaller, only open when you're ready to lose again. Her breath caught. Jason's handwriting. She didn't remember writing that second line. She must have done it the week he left for the Marines, a joke between them. But now it didn't feel like a joke. Now it felt like an invitation. She knelt slowly and pulled the box out into the center of the living room, her heart knocking gently inside her chest. The walls of her apartment seemed to pause, as if they too were holding their breath. She opened the box. Inside she found a folded, sweat-stained G, cream-colored, the fabric rough in her fingers. The patch near the collar read, Columbia BJJ Club. A pair of fingerless grappling gloves frayed at the wrists. A photo, her and Jason mid-laugh, both in sparring gear, him holding up 2 fingers behind her head like bunny ears. A folded note, tucked between the layers of cotton. She unfolded it with both hands, careful not to tear the edges. Cass, if you're reading this, it means you stopped trying to win for once. Good. Don't forget why we trained. It wasn't for trophies or titles. It was because it was the only place we could be still and not be punished for it. You're going to be powerful. But don't forget that power without softness turns into control. And you don't need to control everything. Just learn how to listen, especially to the people who don't speak loud. Love you like family. J. She sat there for a long time, fingers trembling. Not crying. Not yet. Her heart wasn't breaking. It was opening. A different thing entirely. In the hallway mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself holding the GI up to her frame. It still fit. Looser now, somehow. Like she'd shrunk beneath the armor of her title. She laid it across the back of the couch and stared at it. Then she moved to her bedroom and changed out of her pressed slacks and silk blouse. She didn't dress up. She pulled on old leggings, tied her hair back the way she used to, low and slightly off-center. Barefoot, she stepped back into the living room where the gi waited. She didn't wear it. Not yet. Instead, she sat on the floor, legs crossed, the old photo resting in her lap. And she let herself remember who she had been. That version of Cassandra, 21 years old, bruised on the forearms, sore in the knees, and happy, had believed in something simpler. In growth over image. In effort over outcome. In presence over power. But somewhere along the line, she'd stopped training. Stopped listening. The boardroom had demanded certainty, and she'd built a persona to meet it. Sharp suits, sharper words, controlled posture, controlled people. But control, she now understood, was a poor substitute for connection. The next morning, Cassandra walked into the Valencia basement gym before sunrise. The mats were rolled up. The space was still and dim. She didn't turn on the overheads, just one floor lamp in the corner. She stepped onto the mat barefoot, wearing the old GI. She bowed. There was no one to see her, no one to record, no one to cheer. And that, for once, made it sacred. She sat on her knees, closed her eyes, and whispered aloud to no one, "Teach me again." Later that day, she returned to her office like usual, except nothing about her was quite the same. She didn't snap at her assistant. She didn't rush through her inbox. She didn't lead with clipped sentences. She paused. She listened. She watched how people shifted when she entered. and instead of commanding presence, she earned it with attention. At noon, she received an unexpected call from the community center near 9th Street. The woman on the other end said, "Hi, we just had a man named Micah Lane reserve a small space in our back room for some kind of class. We saw your name listed as a potential sponsor." Cassandra blinked. He didn't tell me." "Well, it's a quiet thing," the woman said. "No sign-ups yet, but he left a message. We're not building fighters, just building people who remember how to breathe." Cassandra closed her eyes, smiled softly. "Put me down for the first donation." That evening, she returned to the mat again. Not at the gym. Not in her office. In her living room. Alone. She played Ruby's words again in her head. Strong people help others feel strong, too. She imagined Jason sitting across from her, grinning, and she whispered again, "I'm ready to lose." She didn't walk in to teach. She walked in to fall. The community center on 9th and Halston didn't look like much. Peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, a vending machine with 3 working buttons. The kind of place people passed without looking twice. But that Saturday morning, the back room glowed with something more than fluorescent bulbs. A few plastic folding chairs had been pushed aside. A worn-out mat, patched and faded, covered part of the floor. There were no mirrors, no logos, no framed motivational quotes, just a whiteboard in the corner with 5 handwritten words. "We begin by listening first." Cassandra stood at the entrance for a moment, heart tapping a quiet rhythm in her chest. She wore no badge, no title, just a loose hoodie, tied back hair, and her old GI folded in her bag. Micah was already inside, kneeling beside Ruby, who was rearranging a line of foam blocks into something vaguely architectural. He looked up when she entered, nodded once. No surprise, no ceremony, just a quiet, "Glad you came." She stepped in slowly, removed her shoes, and bowed her head lightly, not toward him, but toward the space. A habit she hadn't practiced in years. Micah stood, motioned toward the center. "We keep things simple here." She nodded. "I don't remember how to be simple." He offered a faint smile. "Then this is a good place to practice." Others began arriving in 1s and 2s. A lanky boy in a hoodie whose hands never left his pockets. A woman in her 60s wearing orthopedic shoes and a fire in her eyes. A father with his teenage son, both awkward in their movements but eager in presence. A few Valencia employees, Jules among them, stood near the wall, trying to look casual while sneaking glances at Cassandra. No one clapped, no one bowed. They simply gathered. And then Micah began. He didn't demonstrate holds or takedowns. He walked to the center of the room and said, "There are 3 forms of strength: knowing when to stand, knowing when to yield, and knowing when to stay." He demonstrated balance, not with brute poses, but by slowly shifting his weight on one foot and inviting others to follow. He showed how people leaned forward too much when they were afraid, how shoulders curled inward when they felt small. Cassandra watched him, then herself. She hadn't realized how often she braced. Even standing still, she carried tension like armor. Halfway through, Micah called for partners. Cassandra found herself across from Jules. The young intern hesitated. "This feels weird." "Good," Cassandra replied. "We're in the right place then." They took hands, not to wrestle, just to feel weight. Micah instructed, "Don't push, don't pull, just be aware." At first, Jules resisted every movement. Cassandra, out of habit, tightened in response. Then she remembered. She loosened, listened. And Jules, startled by the release, softened too. The two of them stood there, palms connected, not fighting, not proving, just present. For the first time, Cassandra wasn't afraid to fall. Later, after the session ended and people lingered with folded jackets and hesitant smiles, Cassandra stayed behind to help clean up. Ruby sat crisscross on the edge of the mat, drawing something in a spiral notebook. Micah rolled up the corner of the mat slowly, methodically. Cassandra picked up a stack of foam blocks. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Micah didn't look up. "You just did." She smirked. "Why this place? Why now?" Micah paused. "Because it was time. For you. For all of us." He looked around the room, empty now but not vacant. "There's too much noise out there, and too many people forgetting how to be still. This place doesn't fix that, but it helps." Cassandra sat beside him. "I spent 20 years building a version of myself that didn't know how to sit still," she admitted. Micah looked over. "And now? I'm undoing it." "Slow work," he said. She nodded. "Important work." As the sky turned gold through the narrow windows, Ruby walked over and handed Cassandra her notebook. "I made you something." Cassandra took it carefully. Inside was a drawing, her and Micah standing side by side. Between them, a quote written in large, colorful letters. "It's not about who wins. It's about who listens." Cassandra swallowed hard. "This is beautiful." "Daddy said you're learning to breathe," Ruby said. "So I wanted to help." Cassandra looked at Micah. "He told you that?" "No," Ruby shrugged, "but I can tell." Then she hugged Cassandra, without asking, and Cassandra didn't flinch. She held her, fully. No boardroom, no badge, no image to protect. Just a woman learning how to be real again. By the end of the month, the quiet class in the back of the community center had grown. Not from advertising, but from word. Word of stillness, of kindness, of something rare. Micah never raised his voice, never expanded the room. He simply kept the door open. Cassandra came every week, sometimes to practice, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to breathe. Each week, someone new arrived. A veteran, an anxious teen, an overwhelmed parent, a former executive who just wanted to feel something again. No one asked about titles, no one asked for photos, but everyone noticed how Cassandra now listened more than she spoke, and how Micah always swept the floor when class ended, not because he had to, but because stillness too could be an offering. One evening as Cassandra walked home with Ruby, the girl looked up at her and asked, "Do you still work in the tall building?" "I do. But you smile more now." Cassandra paused. "Why do you think that is?" "Because you stopped needing to win all the time." Cassandra laughed softly. "Who taught you all this?" Ruby shrugged. "You did. When you sat down." The dojo was empty when she arrived, except for the janitor, still sweeping the floor like it mattered. Cassandra Rourke stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, the other clutching a folded piece of paper she hadn't yet dared to open. The room was bathed in golden light. Late afternoon sun spilled through the narrow windows of the community center, casting long shadows over the mat. Dust motes floated gently in the air, undisturbed, like tiny truths suspended in stillness. Micah Lane was sweeping the floor, as always. Same slow rhythm. Same steady posture. Same quiet reverence, as if the act of cleaning was itself a form of prayer. He didn't look up when she entered, but he knew she was there. He always did. Cassandra stepped inside slowly. She wasn't wearing a guy. just a soft cream sweater, sleeves pushed to the elbows, and jeans she hadn't worn in years. She felt her heels press into the mat, and something in her chest eased. This wasn't her space, but it had become her sanctuary. She walked to the edge and sat. Legs crossed, palms resting open on her knees. Micah finished sweeping and leaned the broom against the wall. He turned toward her, wiping his hands on a towel, and tilted his head slightly. Not a question, not a demand, just a space. Open, waiting. She unfolded the letter in her lap and began to read aloud. Dear Miss Cassandra, thank you for donating to the community center. We got better lights now and they don't flicker as much. That makes Daddy happy because he says clear light helps people see each other better. I think you're one of those lights. Not a flickery one. A soft one. Sometimes I pretend you and Daddy are superheroes, but without capes. Just people who teach other people how to stand tall, even if they fall. P.S. I made you another picture. It's on the back. Cassandra turned the page. Drawn in colorful marker was a simple image. Micah and Cassandra sitting side by side on the mat, both smiling. Ruby stood between them, holding a big yellow sun above her head. At the bottom, in looping, careful handwriting, strong people help others feel strong, too. Her voice trembled as she folded the letter gently and held it to her chest. I didn't come here to talk, she whispered. Micah nodded. I came to kneel. He stepped forward and sat beside her. Not across, not above. Beside. No titles. No balance of power. Just two people breathing in the same quiet. They sat like that for a long time. No need to move, no need to speak. Until Cassandra finally said, You know what I used to believe? Micah turned toward her, wordless. That the only way to survive was to stay sharp, stay higher. That love was weakness. That stillness was danger. She looked at the letter again, smiling through the sting behind her eyes. But stillness isn't danger, is it? No, Micah said. It's where the world finally catches up to your heart. Cassandra looked at him. Are you ever afraid? Only when I think I'm supposed to have all the answers. She nodded slowly. I used to think leadership meant walking in front. And now? Now, I think it means walking with. Micah smiled. She mirrored it, tired, tender, real. Later, when the sun had dipped low and their shadows stretched toward the walls, they stood together and folded the mats. Not because they had to, but because it was their way of ending the day, with care. Cassandra didn't ask what came next. She didn't plan a press release, didn't write a speech, she just stayed, as herself. A few weeks later, she received a card from Jules, mailed, not emailed, handwritten in clean script. You may not know this, but a lot of us stayed at Valencia because of that video. Not the edited one, the real one. We saw you lose, then we saw you listen. That's the kind of leader I want to follow. Jules Cassandra set the card beside Ruby's letter and the photo of Jason she had placed on her shelf. Not trophies, not awards, but reminders. That real leadership had nothing to do with being first, and everything to do with presence. Months passed. Micah's community sessions grew, not into a business, not into a brand, but into a gathering. Veterans, teenagers, single moms, programmers, people with shaky breath and heavy hearts. They came, not for belts or techniques, but for space. Cassandra came, too. Sometimes to move, sometimes just to sweep the floor. Once, she knelt beside Micah with a towel and whispered, I used to think falling was failure. He didn't respond. She didn't need him to. because now, when she fell, she didn't scramble to get up. She breathed, and every time she did, she left a little less armor on the mat. One evening, as Micah turned off the lights and they walked out together, Ruby skipped between them, holding both their hands. She looked up and said, "You know what I decided?" "What's that?" Cassandra asked. "I think both of you are like janitors." Cassandra laughed. "We are?" "Uh-huh. You help clean up people's noise." Micah chuckled. "We try." Ruby grinned. "You don't try. You listen. That's different." And in that moment, Cassandra felt it. What Jason must have felt all those years ago when he rolled gently and laughed on the mat beside her. Not victory, not control, but peace. One morning, months later, Cassandra walked into the community center alone. Micah was already there, sweeping. She knelt beside him. No words, no ceremony. He handed her the broom. She took it and began to sweep beside him. No spotlight, just presence, where the light got in. Thank you for walking with us through the mat and the mop. A story not about who wins, but about who learns to stand, who learns to listen, and who dares to put down the mop and reach out a hand. We hope you found a piece of yourself in Micah's stillness, in Cassandra's unlearning, and in the quiet warmth Ruby brought into every room. Maybe, somewhere in each of us, there's something we still need to lay down, something to forgive, a silence to finally hear. And if you've ever felt like you had to harden yourself just to be seen, remember, sometimes real strength is having the gentleness to stay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.